Well, good morning and welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder, and this is BRN AM for Thursday, September 10th, 2020. And our top story today, we're going to be breaking down the new ESG regulations and what they mean for retirement plans. Well, joining me now to discuss this and more is the former Assistant Secretary of the Employee Benefit Security Administration and now founder and principal of the Rutledge Policy Group, Preston Rutledge. Preston, welcome back to the program. Great to see you this morning.
Thank you, Jeff. It's great to be here.
It's always great to talk with you. I love kind of the, for lack of a better term, inside baseball. Hey, we're in baseball season. And today's topic, we talked about the regulatory process last time you were on. Today's topic, I think we're going to give a little bit of a primer on environmental social governance, or better known as ESG. So lay it out for us. What are some of your thoughts about ESG in general?
Well, of course, over the summer, my former agency published a proposed rule on how ESG factors should be approached by ERISA fiduciaries. By that, I mean the fiduciaries of plans that are covered by the U.S. Private pension plan law. I'm talking about the private defined benefit plans, private employer defined benefit plans, DC plans, 401k plans, for example. So that's a specific slice of the world's institutional investing assets. It's almost $10 trillion, give or take. So it's a significant slice. But that particular slice of assets, unlike other institutional assets in the United States and around the world, is governed by the Title I of ERISA, and the fiduciary duty rules include something known as the exclusive purpose rule. And you can see how ESG might bump up against a concept like that. The concept being a fiduciary has a duty to manage the plan, including the investment decisions it makes, for the exclusive purpose of providing benefits to the plan participants. So with that context, over the years, and this goes back decades really, to the 90s and even earlier, in informal guidance, I would call it, less formal than a regulation, the DOL has many times been asked about this issue. Now it's gone under different names. Many years ago, there was a movement for something known as ETI, economically targeted investments, which is sort of a flavor of ESG. It's evolved over the years, but today we talk about it as ESG. And basically what all these concepts have in common is whether it's okay to invest assets for additional purposes, not just the purpose of maximizing risk-adjusted return for the benefit of the participants. So the DOL has had a fairly consistent message over the decades. And that basic message has been a fiduciary may not sacrifice return or accept increased costs to pursue a collateral benefit. And this proposal adheres to that basic core principle that's been around for decades. I mean, if there's a key takeaway, a key core sentence, it would be the part of the proposal that says that the proposal makes clear that an ERISA fiduciary may not invest in an ESG vehicle when they understand that the underlying investment strategy of that vehicle is to subordinate return or increase risk for the purpose of non-financial objectives. What the rule does, the proposal, it recognizes that essentially there are two types of ESG. It does not outlaw ESG. That's a reaction I've seen from some, and that's not what the proposal does. It does recognize that there's an ESG, a version of ESG that focuses on risk return for the plan's participants. Some folks call that risk return ESG. And then there's a second kind of ESG that focuses on benefits other than risk return for stakeholders other than just the plan's participants. Some folks call that collateral benefit ESG. When you see these ESG analyzed, whether it's in Europe or in America or anywhere around the world, you frequently see that sort of division. There are some that believe that as a policy matter, both kinds of ESG should be pursued. The American approach in the private pension world, because of the exclusive purpose rule primarily and the duty of prudence and loyalty, says yes to the first kind, risk return ESG, and essentially no to the other kind. I'm simplifying it a little bit, but that's actually a fairly good. Those are the bones of the policy as it's evolved over the years.
Well, Preston, I mean, this is there's a big trend obviously going on. I mean, every time I put my newsletter together, there's an article about sustainability, sustainable investing, ESG, somewhere in that article. But I want to bring it back to due diligence. So, we're going to talk about this entire concept throughout the full show. So we have another segment. But as a reformed, and I mean that in a joking way, as a reformed consultant, investment consultant, and advisor, we do a lot of due diligence. Plan sponsors do a lot of due diligence, and you've got to kick the tires on any investment in a pension, any type of pool of assets, right? I mean, you've got to do that due diligence. You've got to understand what you're investing in as a fiduciary, and then you've got to document what you do, right? I mean, so that's got to be part of this process as well for evaluating ESG funds.
Yes, it is. And it's interesting you point out the documentation perspective. That has always been best practice for a fiduciary who's doing their due diligence. They go through their prudent process of applying objective risk return criteria, and they document it so that they can demonstrate later if a question comes up, the process they went through. The duty of fiduciary applies at the time you're making the decision. It's not supposed to be a 20/20 hindsight situation, a few years down the road if the investment doesn't work out. That doesn't mean you breached your duty if you did your process properly at the front end. So if you are looking at, say, putting an ESG fund up on the platform for a 401k, you really go through the very same process. And the rule does point out that, and makes it explicit, that you should document that process. There's been some criticism of that as being sort of I think, a way to discourage ESG. But as you point out, it's really no different than what you're supposed to do for every kind of investment.
Yeah, I mean, I would think, I kind of think about it, and again, I am not an expert on ESG. I'll be the first person to tell you that. But I am an expert on doing due diligence. And, when it comes to evaluating fees, for example, and I've seen things, regulations come out. I mean, it's not the cheapest investment that will help you avoid litigation. There has to be a merit to the investment. And I think, just generally speaking in lay terms, I mean, I think that the same kind of applies here. You've got to make sure that the investment is prudent, that it makes sense, that you understand how it works. What are the factors that go into ESG as an example? What are the fees associated with it? And what are the risk-adjusted returns as a result of all this? And does it make sense? I mean, that just is an analogy that I would use.
Yeah, I mean, it's return net of fees is a key here. The fees may look a little higher in one investment or another, but if the return net of fees is superior, then that's an appropriate investment.
Yeah.
I was going to say I think one of the things also that has prompted the DOL to move at this point is, as I mentioned, over the years, over the decades, really, there's been less formal guidance that has announced these different principles, and there's been a basic underlying consistency. But it's true that for the last several administrations, each administration has felt the need to sort of weigh in around the margin. So there was a bulletin in the Clinton administration, there was a bulletin in the Bush administration, there was a bulletin in the Obama administration, and there was a field assistance bulletin in the Trump administration. And I think there's a sense that given the increasing trend toward ESG, and particularly the accelerated trajectory, the amount of assets that have flowed into ESG funds in 2019 is 4 times 2018. That's a soup. So there's a sense that we need to I think there's a feeling, let's remind people of what the basic rules are. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's time to put it into a formal rulemaking, which will be perhaps and hopefully a little more permanent than an advisory opinion or a field assistance bulletin or something like that.
Yeah. Well, we're going to take a quick break.
Stop the pain. I was going to say stop the ping pong, for example. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's okay. We're going to take a quick break. This is a fascinating subject. We're going to have more with Preston Rutledge. So stay tuned right here on BRN AM. Imagine a new television network that will make you richer, healthier, and in control of your financial future. This network is for the policewoman in Nashville, Tennessee, the baker in Dubuque, Iowa, the teacher in Lexington, Kentucky. We want to make the idea of savings and retirement culturally relevant. But what do you see as a defining issue of the midterms? Especially for the smaller businesses. I mean, they are the lifeblood of the American economy. Featuring exclusive interviews, current affairs, and docuseries. 33 years old, you retired early.
The philosophy is money only matters if it helps you live a life that you love.
But you got to start thinking about retirement as soon as you get in.
The Broadcast Retirement Network will drive very high engagement with premium partnerships. So this isn't retirement and savings for your parents or grandparents. This is for all Americans. And we're going to change the way you think about money. Welcome to the next frontier of retirement and savings. This is BRN, the Broadcast Retirement Network.
If you were like 58% of Americans, you didn't go to college. Or you did, but never finished. Maybe it's the thought of a big, intimidating campus. At Independence University, all classes are held online. Maybe it's the thought of being alone in a sea of students. At Independence U, you'll get a personal support team to help you every step of the way. Maybe it's the cost of all those books and supplies. Online means no books to buy. We even give you a new laptop and tablet to keep when you graduate. Maybe your life doesn't fit typical college classes. At Independence U, our online college fits your schedule. Let's meet a few students.
Independence University held my hand through the process.
Don't be afraid to take the leap because it has changed my life drastically.
Just take the first step and you can do it. If I did it, you can do it too.
At IU, there's no barriers to your degree.
800-535-9916.
Welcome back. We're talking to Preston Rutledge. He's the former Assistant Secretary of the Employee Benefit Security Administration, and he's now the founder and principal of the Rutledge Policy Group. Preston, thanks so much for staying with us this morning.
Well, thank you. So before the break, we were talking a little bit about the importance of documenting your prudent process. There's a second place where the proposal mentions documenting your prudent process. And that has to do with something that has also been in the guidance for many years, known as the tiebreaker rule. And the tiebreaker rule is the concept where if a fiduciary is looking at I'll simplify it sort of as much as I can. If a fiduciary is looking at two different funds, for example, two different investments, and I think the phrasing originally used was, if all things being equal, these are identical in terms of their objective risk return criteria, but one has ESG as an ESG element and the other does not. If it's all things are being equal, the fiduciary may choose ESG as a tiebreaker and then go with the ESG fund. That's the concept of the tiebreaker rule. And the proposal keeps the tiebreaker rule, but it does, and you'll see this in the preamble, the department does express some skepticism about the frequency of ties. It doesn't deny that a tie can exist. That's been part of the department's analysis for a long time. But it does express skepticism that they occur very frequently. And there is a concern that the tiebreaker could be used as a workaround of the original core point we made in the first segment. Seeing a tie where maybe a tie doesn't really exist so that you can do an ESG investment when otherwise you would be precluded under that basic core principle. So in order to deal with that, the proposal also explicitly requires that the fiduciary who thinks they have a tie on their hands, that they document the prudent process they've gone through to determine that, well, there is a tie. So somehow, document that why are these investments not distinguishable? So that's there, and that's getting a lot of attention. But once again, like we discussed previously, documenting your process is best practice and has been basically throughout the history of ERISA, and advisors like yourself in your previous life understand that quite well.
Yeah, believe me, I've written so many memos, my fingers hurt. Preston, let's talk about going forward, because there's this comment period, and I would assume that there are a lot of comments, but take us through the next steps in terms of understanding, what happens in the Labor Department when you get comments. I guess it's kind of going back to the regulatory conversation we had last month, but what happens now, and how do we get to that final rule for people?
Well, what happens now, and the public comment period did close, and this rule did get the most comments of anything the department has done in recent history. Well over 1,000 comments.
Go figure.
Posted. Yes, and from international organizations. I mean, I expected this at the time we were in the process of drafting it. It was in process before I left in May. Obviously, it didn't get published until after I left, but it was anticipated there would be a lot of comments. What happens now is the career staff has to knuckle down and read those comments, read them and categorize them, and try to create for the executive staff a kind of a list of issues and the pros and cons and the comments for and against. And there are comments in favor of a proposal. There's comments against a proposal. And usually the comments will focus on, most comments are not generally for or against the entire proposal, up and down. They focus on particular issues. And one part of the rule might come in for more criticism than another. And the department very definitely pays attention to that. Excuse me. In my experience, rules are almost always adjusted at the final stage to accommodate comments that come up. I mean, the public comment period is very valuable to the department. There's no, monopoly on wisdom at the DOL, and they know that. And with professionals in this world of pension investing are a lot of very, very important expertise out there, and the public comment period allows EBSA to tap on that. I'll give you one example. I'm going to be fascinated to see how this turns out. There is one part of the rule that got a lot of comments. It's the part of the rule that says, we mentioned earlier, if you go through your prudent process, a fiduciary may decide to put an ESG-oriented fund up on the 401k menu for participants to choose. The rule does draw a line and say that you may not, however, even if you've gone through that prudent objective risk return process analysis, you may not make that fund the default alternative, what we call in the industry, and you're familiar with, the QDIA, the qualified default investment alternative. The rule says that you cannot do that. Now that has gotten a lot of comment, and I think the commenters who criticize that, they have, I think, a fair point. The point they make is, once the fiduciary has gone through and the process, a prudent process, and chosen that investment based on objective risk return criteria, at that point, why does it matter what the labeling of the fund is, or whether it's ESG or not? It's the fund that you expect to create the greatest risk-adjusted return. And I think that's a fair point. What the department had said in the preamble that explains their perspective, though, is also, I think, a fair point, and that's why this will be such a fascinating issue. And the perspective they make is, they explain is, when you're dealing with a default alternative, by definition, you're dealing with a participant who has not made an affirmative investment election. That's why we have defaults. People who have not expressed their preference for a particular investment. If they're defaulted into an ESG, that fund by definition will have will express certain social policy objectives, E, S, or G perspectives. And it will be the fiduciary who made those choices. So there's a discomfort with defaulting someone who has made no choice into a fund that there's a concern that the fiduciary's personal preferences are being people are being defaulted into a fund that reflects the fiduciary's personal preferences. So that concerns the department with respect to what we call under ERISA the duty of loyalty. The duty of loyalty. So it's a fascinating issue. I'm going to be very interested to see how the department works that one out. I've even read recently, like yesterday, if you don't mind my mentioning, there's a journal in the UK known as the Responsible Investing Magazine, and they wrote an article about it just on Tuesday, and they pointed out interestingly that it was interesting. They said that the rule overall made a lot of sense. They thought some of the criticisms were a little overwrought. That the rule makes a lot of sense, but they did point out this one perspective on the QDIA, and they called that into question and thought that was one place where they thought the rule might have gone too far. As the rule settles in, as people read it around the world, and it's particularly if you focus on the regulatory text, I think folks will find it's a workable rule. It gives you the path to doing ESG in an ERISA covered plan, but doing it properly and doing it in a way that continues to focus on the return on investment for the participants. And I guess the final sign-off perspective on this and the department mentioned this in the preamble. Don't forget that pension plans and 401ks have built into them a very important social purpose, and that's the social purpose of providing, retirement income for folks when their working lives end. That is in and of itself a very worthy social goal, and it's really what ERISA was designed to do from the ground up.
Yeah, it's absolutely a fascinating topic, and I can't think of a rule. I think you pointed this out. I can't think of a rule in my memory that got as much attention. It's going to be fascinating, and I'm looking forward to checking in with you throughout the remainder of the year on where this thing goes and also other things. We're going to have to leave it there, though. Preston, thanks so much for joining us in the program this morning. Always great to get your insight and inside the baseball knowledge. Have a great rest of the day. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Jeff. I look forward to it.
And that wraps up this episode of BRN AM. Have a topic of interest or someone you think we should talk to? Then drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the news in retirement, markets, technology, personal finance, so much more, check out our newsletter, The Morning Pulse. And until tomorrow, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.
Are you being audited and do you owe the IRS $10,000 or more in back taxes? Is the IRS threatening to take more of your money? Don't fight the IRS alone. The Tax Doctor is here to help you negotiate your tax bill and reduce your stress. The IRS can freeze your assets and seize your bank accounts, but you can stop these IRS actions. The Tax Doctor will work with you using our years of experience to represent your case to help you get the best resolution under the IRS guidelines. Help is here to deal with the IRS to reduce your stress. We've handled thousands of cases, so we know what we're doing. If you owe $10,000 or more in back taxes, do not call the IRS alone. Call a Tax Doctor now for a tax emergency analysis.
Call 800-224-6439.